Welcome back to Turpentine VC, a podcast where we discuss the art and science of building successful venture firms, VC to VC. Today, we're releasing an episode from Turpentine's show, The Cognitive Revolution, with host Nathan Labenz. Nathan was joined by Anish, Charya, general partner, and Olivia Moore, AI partner at Andreesen Horowitz, for a deep dive into AI voice technology. Up ahead, they discuss where they discover AI trends, why AI voice technology is the next meaningful frontier, and their investment strategy in AI voice, from B2B to consumer. Please enjoy the episode.
Olivia Moore and Anish Charya from a16z's here to talk about the future of AI voice interaction. So first thing I wanted to say was just, you guys are part of a group that I affectionately refer to as AI scouts, people who are out there on the edges of what exists and kind of exploring it in, I think, a lot of different ways. So before we get into the actual object level stuff of like what you found and what you think, is coming in the realm of voice, I'd love to just get a little bit of like maybe meta lessons or, specific alpha tips for how you do such a good job of this. Like, where do you go for information? What's the sort of top of funnel for you? How do you know you're onto something? I think people could learn a lot from your example in that respect.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, in many ways, it's our job to be kind of chronically online and tracking every new thing that happens, especially as consumer investors. So it's something that we've tried to hone over the last few years in particular. It's so interesting because there's a pretty big delta, I think, between what AI scouts or AI experts, early adopters, where they're spending their time and where they're talking, and then where kind of normal consumers are. So we try to be in both places. I would say like Twitter, of course, is where most AI founders are announcing new companies or new models, new breakthroughs. AI newsletters have been massive, meetups. But then in terms of like where real people are sharing what they do with AI, it's mostly on places like Instagram, TikTok. YouTube is a shocking one. YouTube is actually like the #1 mobile app and the #2 website in the world. And so we actually find that for many companies in the consumer prosumer space, if you look at traffic, like by far their #1 referral source from social is YouTube. Like there's this whole separate economy of kind of YouTube influencers or YouTube creators who are making like how-to content about using different AI tools. So I would say we try to track all those places. In terms of what's an early signal to us, like often we'll see normal people, again, usually teenage girls, to be frank, like trying to manipulate ChatGPT into doing something, like to be a therapist, to be a friend, to be a coach. And once we see something like that, it's like, okay, the consumer pull is strong enough that probably there can and will be a couple standalone, more focused products here.
I think the other thing, Nathan, we try to do a lot of is just use the products, and that sounds obvious, but it's surprising how few people seem to have actually tried like Operator, Deep Research, DeepSeek, O1 Pro, Charya. These are not super obscure long tail products, and consumers find that their way to these products. But for all the folks that are sort of insiders and are paid to be doing this work, that still surprisingly few actually look at those. It's just a great way to build your intuition.
Yeah, that's my #1 advice always too, is just get hands-on. Like you can't really go wrong with that. So the one interesting thing there was, it sounds like you're looking as much or even maybe more for demand side pull as you are at the because people are all the time coming forward with their technologies to offer, but you're looking for people that are specifically trying to meet a need that maybe nobody's met yet and figure out what that implies.
Yeah, consumer is so random and magical that we try to let the data tell us. Like you can have the most tenured pedigree team in the world building a consumer app, and if it doesn't hit, it doesn't hit. And that can be for like a variety of different reasons. Like maybe it's bad market timing. Maybe they got the product insight wrong, but some specific feature, or the product insight right, but some specific feature wrong. And then, no one completes the onboarding. And so I would say we try to let the data in terms of what people are actually using tell the story to us. And sometimes looking at the data of things like people polling ChatGPT to these off-label use cases will kind of give us like a little warning signal or a heads up that like, okay, this is a behavior that's working. And so we should keep an eye out for products that are kind of targeting this behavior.
A great example of this, there's this old joke in pre-AI that like every social app would like collapse into being a dating app. And I think in the same way that every like large language model is, being tortured into being a therapist. So that, it's like a funny thing to say at a dinner party, but it's also a leading indicator of what consumers want these models to do and some of the things that, we want to see in the future.
Cool. Well, let's talk about voice. I would love to maybe just, for starters, get sort of the tip of the top highlights. Like, what products and experiences have you seen that are just the absolute best user experiences that are out there today? Hopefully I've tried them, but we're about to find out.
Yeah. Well, maybe I can frame it and then Olivia can talk about some of the specific products. So I think the thing to zoom all the way out is grounding ourselves in the fact that voice intermediates every human interaction and relationship largely, right? Like here we are obviously having voice intermediate our relationship and our conversation and the way that we get to know each other. So it really is the original, most important form of communication, human communication, but it's just been completely unaddressable by technology because we've never had the infrastructure. So it's very interesting because so many of the other substrates that we're applying to AI to are areas where we've had like a lot of historical technology exploration, whereas voice is just a complete blank piece of paper. And that's why I think we're as excited about the product implications as we are about the distribution implications of this sort of technology surface.
Totally. Yeah, I would say there's been a couple of surprising things to us in terms of like where voice is working now, at least on the startup side. A lot of the startups that are getting real traction in terms of net new companies and products are actually more B2B oriented, just because there's so many businesses that are now running off of call centers or paying for one or two or three people, even for small businesses, to answer the phone all day. And so once you're at a point where voice models can be anywhere in the realm of human performance there, like it kind of makes all the sense in the world to at least have the voice agent be doing your after hours calls or your calls that would go to voicemail. So my guess would be that actually a lot of people have maybe interacted with an AI voice agent and not quite known it because it's been a business calling them or it's been the receptionist when they've, called to schedule an appointment or something like that. On the consumer side, it's been so far maybe a little different than we expected. I think most consumers have interacted with AI voice through something like a ChatGPT or a Grok, which are incredible voice experiences. More recently, something like a Sesame was like a massive breakthrough. And that is still just like a web demo, early version of what's to come there. And so my guess is like when we see the Sesame team is open sourcing the model, when we see models like that kind of spread and become more accessible for app builders to build on top of, we'll see maybe a corresponding explosion in consumer-focused voice-first tools.
I mean, a crazy thing that happened, and things are moving so quickly, I think it's easy to forget these things, is 1-800-CHAT-GPT. Like, what was that? And I think it sort of, whether it failed or succeeded, I think it pointed to an important insight, which is that maybe the first way most people in the world will actually experience AI is via voice, both as consumers and, consumers consuming sort of business offerings.
Yeah, I think of my dear mama all the time, who is now in her early 90s and lives alone and is sharp, but not like an early adopter of new technologies. And for her, I think it's going to be Alexa Plus that is going to be the sort of, big transition from, she already sits there and asks, I think, to play music for her, but like, will she engage it in conversation? Like, how natural will she find it? I don't know, but it's clearly going to be for her that form factor that could unlock a whole new set of things.
And what's very funny is, ironically, Mama perhaps is not exploring new technology, but also isn't that familiar with old technology, which is maybe that's, she's calling you to get tech support and help using her existing products and devices. Like, I think the potential applications for voice as applied to seniors are super interesting. We've discussed it a lot. And it's not just access to the new things, it's access to the old things as well that you never develop the skills to interact with.
Yeah. Funny enough, one of my first GPT-4 tests going way back to the Red Team days was tech support for seniors. Yeah. And the prompt that I found to work really well, which is exactly what I say to her when this, exactly what you're describing happens, when she calls me and says, my friend, emailed me and I can't find it. I always tell her, read everything on the screen from the top to the bottom. And she'll literally go like, okay, Verizon, the time. And then eventually we get down to like, where the issue is. And that same thing, basically worked out of the box with GPT-4. And of course that was text only at that time, but I do see that as a a huge unlock for all sorts of different
That's
experiences that she kind of struggles to access right now. If they can figure out the TV remote, then we'll really be in business.
No, exactly. Well, and I think most people don't have it sounds like infinitely patient person like you to kind of walk them through how to do that. And so, I mean, even we saw recently, I think it was late last year in December, Google released kind of the Gemini models that could see what was on your screen and interact with you in real time. And it feels like we're right on the brink of models like that. OpenAI has one as well, becoming kind of API available and becoming ready for builders to actually capitalize on. And so once we see something like that kind of become actually usable, it's going to be massive.
It's also so interesting because it sort of, points at something maybe Google and other search players should have done pre-AI, which is how do you take everything on the internet and apply it? Like the most important context is the context that's around me in my physical space. So the idea of being able to point your phone at the remote in the case of Mema and be able to sort of debug the problem that way, instead of trying to translate what you're seeing in the physical world line by line to either, Nathan or to Google. It just like that interaction pattern doesn't make sense.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. There's a growing expense eating into your company's profits. It's your cloud computing bill. You may have gotten a deal to start, but now the spend is sky high and increasing every year. What if you could cut your cloud bill in half and improve performance at the same time? Well, if you act by May 31st, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure can help you do just that. OCI is the next generation cloud designed for every workload, where you can run any application, including any AI projects, faster and more securely for less. In fact, Oracle has a special promotion where you can cut your cloud bill in half when you switch to OCI. The savings are real. On average, OCI costs 50% less for compute, 70% less for storage, and 80% less for networking. Join Modal, Skygave's Animation, and today's innovative AI tech companies who upgraded to OCI and saved. Offer only for new US customers with a minimum financial commitment. See if you qualify for half off at oracle.com/turpentine. That's oracle.com/turpentine. Hey everyone, Erik here. In this environment, founders need to become profitable faster and do more with smaller teams, especially when it comes to engineering. That's why Sean Lanahan started Squad, a specialized global talent firm for top engineers that will seamlessly integrate with your org. Squad offers rigorously vetted top 1% talent that will actually work hard for you every day. Their engineers work in your time zone, follow your processes, and use your tools. Squad has front-end engineers excelling in TypeScript, React, and Next.js ready to onboard to your team today. For backend, Squad engineers are experts at Node.js, Python, Java, and a range of other languages and frameworks. While it may cost more than the freelancer on Upwork billing you for 40 hours, but working only 2, Squad offers premium quality at a fraction of the typical cost, without the headache of assessing for skills and culture fit. Squad takes care of sourcing, legal compliance, and local HR for global talent. Increase your velocity without amping up burn. Visit choosesquad.com and mention Turpentine to skip the waitlist.
So one of the things I noticed in your presentation about this is that you said it's like basically solved, I think was the phrase. And I'm kind of wondering like what you see as remaining, if anything. The Sesame model might have even come out since that presentation and certainly takes another step forward in terms of just overall natural sound of the voice. I find the interruption mechanics still a little bit gnarly, and like especially if there's kind of a multi-way conversation. Sometimes I try to demo advanced voice mode for people just to try to bring them up to. My goal is to like make it a quick way to bring people up to speed. I'm like, this is where AI is at now, if you haven't been paying attention. But then those demos often kind of go a little bit sideways on me because like the interruption mechanic is still a little weird. And if I'm doing it one-on-one, like it's okay. I kind of know how to use it, and it seems to be optimized for that one-on-one. But in the group setting, it doesn't like do super well in many cases. Anyway, that's just me kind of identifying my remaining pain points. But what do you think are the sort of hardest things to get right, or the most important things that still need to get solved?
Yeah, I think the things that have gotten maybe solved is too strong, but very close to solved over the past year would be things like kind of basic latency and understandability, which is like the difference between being able to have a conversation and not have a conversation. And so in most cases, I think the models are getting those right now. Latency is like less than half a second on most of the models, which feels very human-like. I think the realization that a lot of people had that have tried the Sesame demo is beyond latency, there's so many kind of speech pattern nuances that an actual human will say, which might actually sound like an error to the model. Like there are extra pauses, they're saying like, or, vocal inflections. And when you add those things like that in, which the Sesame team has done, it goes from being a voice that sounds like much better than an Alexa and Siri, but is still kind of robotic in some ways, or still clearly AI, into something that could be mistaken for a human. I think the remaining things for me, there's still a lot to do around emotionality. I talk to a lot of founders building voice agents who want the models to be able to understand what they're saying and vary the tone and the inflection based on that. So if the AI voice agent is going to say something happy or exciting, the voice should reflect that. If they're going to say something sad, the voice should be kind of like lower in tone and pitch and a little bit slower. And so that's something that we still need to solve. And then interruptibility is huge. I kind of think of it as like humans have also not solved interruptibility in conversations. Like we still have the issue where two people start talking at once and you have to be like, no, you go ahead. And so we need a clever way for voice AI to be able to solve that in a way that humans maybe have not yet.
I think this is why we've gotten where we need to get to for voice models to work. But I think what Sesame showed us is that conversation models may be very different from voice models, or maybe an extension of voice models. So even how are the three of us sort of coordinating on who's going to talk next? There's so much, nonverbal communication that's happening, whether it's video or even in audio. And the models have been trained really well to do speech to text, text to speech. Interestingly, less of the companies we're seeing are using native sort of voice to voice to voice models. So that's one opportunity. And then just generally understanding, as Olivia noted, some of the nuances of conversation and having that be natively programmed in. For example, when I start talking, I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to say. It sort of comes and that's true for all of us, whereas the AI knows exactly what it's going to say, which can sometimes be a little bit creepy. It does not quite get out of the uncanny valley.
Yeah, there's a recent paper from Meta that you're bringing to mind where they're doing brain reading and have sort of established now in, actual signal understanding terms, the kind of phrase level formation that happens like 2 seconds before you actually enter a interesting token, and then how it kind of gets down to like the literal next syllable that's just like a fraction of a second before you spit it out.
The only other thing I'd add is that you actually do see varying levels of performance and sort of conversation quality, which is a very big predictor of driving business outcomes. So for example, we're investors in a company called Happy Robot, which is a voice AI for freight brokers. And if you just look at the quality of their text to speech and just how the conversation feels, it just feels way better than many of the off-the-shelf things. And this is because the team is more technical and has done more work under the hood. So yes, there's a bunch of other competitors who can provide a kind of a fine commodity voice experience. But if you actually are a little bit more specialized in the technology, you can do something that feels more human, and that gives you permission to move into higher value conversations. Persuasion, negotiation, disagreement, like those are pretty nuanced conversations. And for the business to trust you with those conversations, you've got to have a voice model that not just says the right things, but says them in a way that feels compelling.
Yeah, negotiation in particular is a lot to ask somebody to delegate to an AI. Is this company actually doing that for the freight companies? They're doing actual negotiations?
Negotiates, befriends, disagrees. We'll send you the demo. It's amazing. You should embed it. It's like, It's a real aha moment, I think, in terms of what's possible.
It's really interesting because I think to the point of like the LLM always knows exactly what it could or should say. Like there is a version of an AI voice agent that does negotiation that would just respond to the human and say, no, this is my best price. Like, this is what I'm going to offer you, and just kind of say it over and over. But if you launch that kind of experience to a user, like they are going to try to then circumvent, talk to a human agent. Like it's not going to feel like an actual negotiation to them where like they've given it their best and they've gotten a concession from the other side. And so what Happy Robot has done, which is really smart, is they actually introduce extra latency by saying, okay, the voice agent will say, hold on, let me go talk to my supervisor, and put them on hold for like 5 seconds. And then they come back with like a slightly better price. And of course, the voice agent knows, here is my actual max. This is how much I can kind of go up or down or move the price for the end customer. But they found that like the maybe acceptance rate of that kind of final offer is I think much higher in cases where the human feels like they've gone through an actual negotiation, because the voice agent has kind of simulated that situation that feels like satisfying to them.
Yeah, I don't know how to feel about that, to be honest. I mean, it's genius and it's a little bit far out. I guess, staying on this for a second, do people know that they're talking to an AI when they're talking to this?
Mm-hmm.
Does it say that up front, or how do they?
Yeah, it discloses it. And what's actually most surprising is people don't, and look, they're talking to, truckers driving all over the countries in their big rigs. So these aren't exactly, Stanford technology enthusiasts, and they don't mind at all. Because I think that there's kind of our reptilian brain is so trained to react to these interactions in a specific way that once you get into the conversation, even if you intellectually know that it's an AI, you fall into kind of the rhythm, the expectations, the patterns, the cadence of the human conversation very quickly.
Yeah. It reminds me of something actually Anish says a lot, which is like, in the best cases, AI can be more human than the humans. The Happy Robot example is a good one, where every time you call in and you reach the voice agent, he or she you get the same person every time. They're friendly. They'll listen to you, talk about your day or what happened. They'll be very patient. They'll be sympathetic. Like, they'll spend all the time in the world with you on the phone if you want to. And so it's actually, in many cases, like, assuming the voice agent can answer your question, which they almost all can now, like, it's actually a better experience for the end consumer than if you get what can sometimes be a grumpy actual human being on the other end of the phone line.
Yeah, superhuman patience turns out not that hard to achieve and quite valuable. Yeah. And low to no wait times is also like a huge driving force for value. So I definitely see it. I've been really excited about voice for a long time, even though it's probably going to put me as a podcaster out of work before too long as well. You mentioned Siri a minute ago, and obviously they've recently made, headlines in a seemingly negative way by saying they're not going to have an update until 2027, which just feels like possibly the other side of the singularity from where I'm sitting. So I don't know if you can make any sense of that. I guess, another way to maybe come at that is like, how reliable did these things need to be? I mean, I think there's often this sort of, in AI in general, there's this like faux comparison or, sort of imagined perfection that people compare an AI solution to. And I always try to remind people, like, and Ethan Mogg, I think, has a great phrase for this also. It's like the best available or the best like hireable human for the job is really the comparison that you should be making. So is that what Apple is getting wrong here? Or like, how do you make sense of that development?
I have so many thoughts on this. I mean, I think it's for any consumer that interacts with AI products and also uses things like Siri, it's like a stick in the eye 5 times a day, because Siri is still so bad at just the most basic. And then, juxtaposed on all the advertising that Apple's doing about Apple intelligence, it's not awesome. I think it really degrades consumer trust, one. And then 2, look, I think that AI does best when it is exploring the surface of human interaction, which is a little messy. And these large incumbent corporations are designed to take the humanity out of every technology product. So there's a sort of almost irreconcilable tension between the two. So, and look, the more they try to neuter the AI, the more dissatisfied consumers are with it. Some of the Genmoji stuff, like, it's a valiant effort, but it just looks terrible. I don't know. Maybe some people think it looks good. I don't. So I think it's going to be a very difficult spiritual problem for these companies to resolve, because just, between the committees and the lawyers and the whole posture that large incumbents have, it's going to be hard for them to embrace the messiness of AI. I don't know. What do you think, Olivia?
Yeah. I mean, I think we saw the reaction to the AI generated text and notification summaries on iPhones. And I would guess that kind of spooked Apple a little bit, because for Apple to launch a new AI product, to Anish's point, like, it has to be production ready to land on hundreds of millions of iPhones of people of all ages, all sorts of use cases, and it needs to feel both natural and also kind of be correct. Whereas a startup, has the luxury of not having to kind of meet that bar, because the people who seek out and try a new startup product are kind of the natural early adopters, and they know that it's, beta, they know that it's AI, they know that it's a test product. Not to give too much credit here, but I think what we've seen Google do well has been the new Google Labs experiments. And that's where a lot of the best, in my opinion, at least, AI Google products have come out of, like Notebook LM and like some of the video models like VO2, where essentially they have taken the approach where if you're an early technology tester, you kind of sign up and get on the wait list and kind of beta test and use these products. And then ideally, they get them production ready to launch to a slightly larger audience incrementally. But even as we've seen with Notebook LM, because it's Google, once it does make its way to the public, the maybe pace of innovation there is a lot slower than it would be at a net new company that doesn't have tens of thousands of people to continue to employ.
It's like 10 VPs for every engineer working on Notebook LM right now. So, and look, another example of this is deep research. Like deep research actually was originally a Gemini product, and it's obviously a product that Google should be the best in the world at. And yet they never commercialized it in the right way for whatever reason. And now ChatGPT is known for their deep research capabilities. So it's just one missed opportunity after another with incumbents.
We circle back to that in a minute. I wanted to get a little bit deeper on the stack and the sort of balance between allowing the AI to sort of handle things and, kind of put your trust and confidence in its decision-making versus, trying to maximize accuracy, which typically is going to mean more control measures and more kind of stilted, or let's say less natural interactions. The stack, for those that aren't familiar with this, basically has been the sort of audio in, transcribe that to text, feed that into a language model, feed that, response back into another text-to-speech model, and then send the speech back to the user, roughly speaking. You can complicate that if you want to, but that pipeline basically now does actually work fast enough in many cases to be viable. But then there's the fully all multimodal model, voice to voice, all through, one set of weights. When you said that builders are mostly still building on these like more, multi-part kind of pipeline style technology stacks, is that because they're getting better results from it? Or is it because like that's the only thing that is like economical for their use case right now? Like what's driving that? And do you see that changing?
Yeah, I think the voice-to-voice models are definitely, and unsurprisingly, probably a little bit more expensive right now. But also, I think they're just earlier. I talked to a lot of voice agent founders who have probably tried all of the models available. And I think probably Gemini Flash is maybe the best of the bunch if you're going to kind of try to do full voice-to-voice. But in general, kind of like the interruptibility is not quite there yet on those models. But as we I think see and say pretty much every week, like the models are the worst that they're ever going to be right now. And so I'm sure similar to how last May when we first released our voice report, like sub 1 second of latency was hard to imagine. And I'm sure by this time next year, like everyone is going to be using a model stack that's much sleeker and is hard for us to even imagine right now.
I also think that there's, reasoning models are a new primitive, and I think that they're maybe being underappreciated by many because they have the same interface as language models. But if you sort of think about it, it's like, well, there are aspects of interactions that really benefit from this probabilistic nature of the outputs of language models, all the friendship, negotiation, et cetera, that you have in a business conversation even. And then there are things that really do not benefit from that, where you want high degrees of accuracy, like a negotiation, like one price is definitively better than another for one of the parties and the counterparties. So in that case, you can sort of orchestrate reasoning models and language models to handle the right parts of the conversation to get the sort of desired output. So I think you have less of the issues around aspects of the conversation that demand accuracy and the models not being well suited to that. I think the other broad philosophical point, Mark has mentioned this a lot, is the bar be as good as humans, or is the bar be perfect? If the bar is to be perfect, like all these technologies are not there and maybe never will be. If the bar is to like outperform humans, I think we're actually there in many ways.
Yeah. It's all happening very fast. How is the tool use? Because that's one other thing that I could sort of see being a challenge, although I could see it cutting either way, but depending on especially like how idiosyncratic or esoteric your tool use context is. For example, if you're doing like, calls into some obscure freight management system, you might need to have potentially even the ability to like fine tune that model to get those calls to work quite right. So I guess, broadly speaking, how big of a deal is the sort of back end interaction of tool use and like what's working or not working there today from what you've seen?
It's a good question. I mean, I think what we're broadly seeing is that you've got to build a lot more product than just the voice capability. I think the voice capability alone is insufficient. And, there may be more sort of room to explore voice only in areas like agents where there's different types of conversations and, there's different outputs that you want and there's different considerations around sort of price point and, what APIs you want to consume for what fidelity of output. But even then, there's an enormous amount of integrations and workflows that you probably have to deliver to build a traditional moat. So, without commenting on a specific use case in something like freight, our general observation is that like the capability gets you in the conversation, but isn't sufficient to get you to the other side.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, especially when you think about a lot of these companies that voice agents are selling into are very much traditional enterprises. Like they're not, the Apples, the Googles of the world. And so for them to build or launch on a more horizontal way, or even to try to kind of build a voice agent themselves, like in many ways, it's a miracle if they can do it once, let alone kind of keep it updated as the models get better, as there's new options that are going to be a better experience for the customer. When the integration breaks with like the kind of back end system of record, what do they do? And so I think that is why we have seen so much maybe excitement on the customer side for more vertically focused platforms that, to your point, are maybe both fine-tuned for the types of conversations that these customers are having, but also have done the work to build out the long tail of integrations and also the long tail of honestly just conversation types of how do you manage kind of piecing together different tools for different types of tasks that you need to complete.
Yeah, I always think about Tyler Cowen saying context is that which is scarce, and that has never been more true than I think he said that first before the AI moment, or the AI era, I should say, but it's never been more true. And so much of what I see standing in the way between businesses that want to use AI and actual successful use is literally just assembling the context and sometimes getting the context out of their heads and onto some documented form that the AI can process. And so it's not too surprising that you would see base models, even as they are like quite powerful and, extremely versatile, certainly relative to anything that came before. It shouldn't be too surprising that they like don't know the intricacies of not just like the freight business in general, which they might even, but like the way you handle your freight business. That stuff is, that last mile, it trips a lot of people up. Do you have any sort of observations or like synthesis of what's going on there? I honestly still kind of struggle, and I do like some amount of, not a lot, but like enough kind of hands-on consulting with businesses that I've seen this repeatedly, where it seems like people have a really hard time assembling the content. I mean, maybe this is what the verticalized startups are going to solve for us, but do you have a sense for what's going on there? Because it seems like it should be easier, or we should be making faster progress in AI adoption than I feel like we're actually seeing.
Yeah, it's funny. I think we've seen definitely an explosion of kind of AI budgets within enterprises and within end customers. And in some cases, this was especially true 6 months ago. It's less true now, which I think is good. But it's like they're kind of looking for things to buy because, to your point, they're not spending all day around kind of what's the latest in AI. And so they're not exactly sure how to use it in their day to day. I think we even saw this with ChatGPT, where launched massive splash, fastest product ever to 100 million users, but then people weren't really sure how to use it every day, and the usage was flat for basically a year. And only now in the past year, as there's more models and more obvious things to do with it, has the usage kind of picked back up. So I think it's exactly to that point where on both the consumer side and the business side, like if people don't know what to do with the product, and if it's more than kind of a few steps to get up and running, like there's going to be a decreasing funnel, unfortunately, of people who make it through and are actually becoming paying customers. And so that's part of the reason that I think that we're seeing companies that are so vertically focused see like the most success here.
Totally. And actually, I wouldn't underestimate the amount of growth these voice AI companies are seeing, like especially on the agent side, but also on the scribe side. Like the businesses either don't know how to use it or do know how to use it, and it's like growing explosively within these businesses. Because for the businesses that can kind of embrace it, it's such a conceptual straightforward substitution for the humans that make the phone calls that there's no, and of course they need to think then, okay, we're going to hold it to some sort of a CSAT score, and we're going to measure outcomes on things like negotiations. So of course there's guardrails, there's integrations that need to be done. But in the cases where that's working, it's really, really working. And we're seeing some of the fastest growing B2B startups we've seen in 10 years.
Perfect tee up for a little lightning round on like what's really working across different corners of the economy. I was going to start with enterprise, actually. So you mentioned scribes. It seems like that's a pretty well established use case at this point. We're starting to see that like bleed over into like real time coaching on calls, and then obviously like full on agent substitution. Is the real time coaching working? What do we know about that? And then is the substitution actually happening to the point where you think we'll see like labor market statistic effects this year, or do you think this will continue to be sort of isolated like examples that are the exception rather than the norm for a while still?
Yeah, these are great questions. I would say that coaching is definitely working, and it is an interesting transition point in that there are some jobs, for example, a call center job, where if you're an AI product that is selling a coach into call center workers, there's a massive amount of demand for that right now. But what we might imagine that in, 5 years, or probably less, the AI agent is going to kind of replace a lot of those workers. I think where the coaching will really continue to exist is these jobs that have kind of a heavy in real life component or heavy kind of personal component. We've seen quite a few AI real-time coaches for salespeople, for example, for HVAC technicians. Many of these jobs, like whether or not you get the $10,000 upsell, comes down to the nuance of what you say or the question that you ask. So even if you're paying hundreds of dollars a month as an individual user for an AI coach there, it's absolutely worth it. In terms of like the economic impact of the voice agents, I think, to be honest, like there are some cases, a basic call center, for example, where an AI kind of taking the calls will free up the human workers to do honestly much better and more rewarding jobs. Like these are massively high turnover, 300% per year, like thankless jobs in many cases. And I think that like there's better things for people to be doing. And then in other cases, like recruiting is one example. We've seen quite a few voice agents that conduct initial screening calls for human recruiters. And that means that they can spend those 20 extra hours a week with the 5 candidates that they're really excited about and kind of catering to them and really convincing them to engage in the process and take the job. So in many cases, I think we see it as amplifying the humans in their current roles versus like replacing them.
Yeah, I think all of that is exactly right. Potentially more humans sort of move up the stack to do higher value work. I think the other thing is that you could take a look at what's happening and say, at the limit, we have 20% less jobs, or you could say at the limit, we all work 4 days a week and we're paid to be optimists. But like, I believe that there's an opportunity for people to be more specialized and do more of the work that matters and less of the administrative overhead stuff that seems to consume most of our day to day.
Yeah, I'm with that. I guess what I'm trying to really zero in on though is like, because I think it's true in some ways what you're saying, but then there's other ways in which I think like, retraining and reskilling and like everybody was going to become a programmer and like that really hasn't happened. And I think when we look at sort of call centers specifically and the people that work there, like we may free up resources and the company may grow and invest in other ways, but I think in many cases, like the people that have the call center jobs are not going to be like moved into other jobs at that same company. And instead, like the AI is going to just do that job and they'll just have like a much lower headcount in the call center operation, they may reinvest. There may be more R&D. There could be all sorts of great things.
Sure.
And by the way, I also think people should work less, and a sort of new social contract that embraces that is like high on my list of things people should be developing now. But kind of leaving aside like the second order effects of what happens, like do you think we are just like at a point technologically where we could see, if enterprises wanted to do it, a like 90% headcount reduction in call centers?
I mean, I don't think so. We'll see, right? So far, we're not seeing it because, as Olivia said, nobody's job at the call center is to just do initial phone screens, right? People have recruiting jobs, which involve initial phone screens that are annoying and can be overwhelming, as well as, deeper interviews, as well as salary negotiations, as well as ensuring that employees are successful once they onboard. So yes, the AI is going after the initial phone screen, but we haven't seen a reduction in headcount because all of the other work is so important. And, frankly, in many cases, they don't yet trust the AI to do the work, or the AI can't do the work. The AI can't take your employee to a baseball game a month after they've started and make sure they're having a fantastic experience. So I totally understand the conceptual argument. It's just not something we've seen yet.
I think we'll also see kind of the success of AI open up probably like a new type of job that we haven't imagined before for humans to do. Like one great example is one of the, I think, fastest growing jobs right now is basically like contributing training data and doing online tasks and other things that help the AI, which might be actually similarly paid, but like a much better lifestyle than a call center job in many ways. And so it'll be interesting to see like what new types of opportunities open up for humans in the AI era.
Certainly the AIs are less abusive than the human callers. I think we can safely.
Yes, for sure.
That much.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not, to be clear on my perspective on this, I'm not like anti-displacement or trying to sort of stoke fear about that. I think we probably are going to see it and should get ready for it. And ideally, it would be a good thing. Yeah. I often ask people outside of, Silicon Valley bubble, and I live in Detroit, Michigan, if you didn't have to work the job you have to make the money that you need for the rest of your life, like, would you still work the job? And the overwhelming answer is no. And I consider myself very fortunate that like I would probably continue to do what I'm doing, even if I weren't getting paid for it or didn't need to get paid for it. But I think it is really important for the sort of Silicon Valley set to kind of keep in mind that like most jobs are not jobs that people are like doing for the joy of the job. And if they could have their needs met in other ways, like if they would happily take that trade. So I'm not like a job preserver, but I'm just trying to figure out like, at what point is this wave of disruption actually going to hit? Like how much time, do we have to sort of get ready for it? And it seems like the call center thing, if I'm understanding your answer correctly, it's like probably at least another year before we would see a sort of and I wouldn't necessarily, of course, these things are not binary either, but I put that 90% number out there just to sort of say like order of magnitude effect, even if it doesn't go to zero humans in the call center, it sounds like you think that's like at least a 2026 plus phenomenon.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think that it's cold to tell everybody, hey, just go learn programming. So that's not what I'm here saying at all. I think it's very hard to understand what the labor impact of these technologies will be. And I think it's easy to sort of hypothesize about a world in which all the jobs just go away, but it's not what we're seeing yet. So even if the technology is 18 months away, I don't know that the labor market will change in the way that we're perhaps imagining as a result of the technology. I think we'll have to see. I think a broad question, though, that you're speaking to is, what does it mean for our society when we have all this abundance? And is there kind of a lack of purpose? I have a big theory that kind of people need purpose. And if they don't have enough of it, they create it. And sometimes, it gets pointed in bad directions. That's a lot of why I think Google ends up not working culturally. I mean, I think there's a lot of brilliant people there, but in a sense, it's sort of a low stakes environment from a purpose perspective because the business is almost too good. And I do get nervous about mirroring that in society. So I think an almost more interesting question to me is, hey, in a world where we actually just do have all of this abundance, how do we sort of think about ensuring that people have purpose versus ensuring that people have, jobs and income and all those other necessities?
Yeah. I'm a little more maybe even optimistic on that dimension, but it certainly, I filed that under a good problem to have. Okay, so this is supposed to be the lightning round, so let's keep going because I
like opposite of lightning for rolling thunder or something.
But we'll go through these next ones faster. So SMBs, you got the call answering. That seems pretty straightforward. Any like highlights or for SMB owners out there, like where should they go to potentially get, the best of the AI call answerers today?
Yeah, I would say like something we've been very excited about for SMBs is that even for SMBs, there's like a vertical solution depending on what you're doing. So if you're a restaurant operator, if you're, a spa, if you're home services, we'll send our market map. Like we put these all in their market map, but there is a solution catered to you, which is fantastic. This actually gets back to what we were talking about before, which is like SMBs typically have one or two people doing nothing but answering phone calls, which is incredibly expensive for a small business. And when we talk to the SMB customers, when they switch over to a voice agent, they are not laying off that human who is usually like a core part of their business, but that person is now able to spend their time doing things that are like much better for the customer experience or growing the business further or other kind of extensions of the business, which are really powerful and exciting.
Okay. How about creators? This one is maybe a little less interactive, although maybe you're seeing interactive experiences that are sort of creator economy. But one question I had, because I might actually do a episode powered by AI voice in the not too distant future, who has the best voice design today? If I want to create somebody that's going to give me that sort of film noir kind of read, where should I go for that sort of thing?
I mean, I think there's different answers to this question. Like one, there's platforms like 11 where you can clone your voice. 11 also has a great tool where you can kind of like describe a voice, describe a sound, have it created. The other end of the creator part of AI voice to me is these like digital clones, which we're seeing more and more of platforms like Delphi, where you can essentially launch a version of yourself that your audience can interact with in your voice or maybe via text or via other modalities, which is fascinating. I haven't seen AI replacing full podcast episodes for any podcasters yet. I think hypothetically we could get there where maybe you just like prompt the questions that you would ask, but we're probably still a couple years away from that.
It's worth though playing with HeyGen, captions, a bunch of these other products to just, you can fine tune a model of yourself, video and audio, and then giving it a script. Because I think there is a world in which you do this entire podcast without ever owning a video camera or microphone.
Yeah.
We did an episode with HeyGen actually, and for some reason Josh's audio wasn't great. And so we then redid his side of the conversation with his avatar from HeyGen. It's been rented like 6 months. So it was pretty good. I mean, it was not quite as good as, the original would have been, but it was fitting that it happened on that episode.
Yeah.
How about for kids? I've been playing classic Nintendo games with my kids recently, and I put advanced voice mode on often, playing Mario 64, the old like open world game, because I don't know where to go. Like, where's the star? What do I have to do? So I'll ask advanced voice mode, like, all right, this is the level I'm playing. Where do I go? And my kids are now to the point where they're like, Daddy, ask AI anytime that either I'm slow to do something or don't know what to do. So Daddy, ask AI. So that's cool. I would love to have something like interactive, educational for my kids, but I'm also like, yikes, I don't necessarily want to trust anyone, to implement AI effectively for my kids. So any early winners in that space?
I mean, I think we've talked a lot about this as a team, and I think an area of exploration we're fascinated by is just all this stuff around kind of behavioral, social, emotional for kids. So I think that is an area where, AI is very naturally suited to deliver value, and there's just not a lot of technology there. So, a great example is my son loves to play Minecraft, but all of the other people he meets online are like toxic teenagers. So, why isn't there a companion that can sort of play Minecraft with him and model positive social behavior? Another example is just observing the classroom. If your child goes to one of those great schools where they've got 2 teachers in every classroom, one sort of doing all the academic components, one doing all of the social emotional components, you already benefit from this, but a lot of kids don't go to schools like that. So having, a vision model, a multimodal model that can observe the children interacting and give feedback to parents and teachers. So I think there's a ton, of course, there's, assignment generation and quiz generation and, helping kids learn in whatever way is best suited to them. That stuff will happen and it'll be super important. But I think pairing it with all of the kind of emotional opportunities is where we get most excited.
Yeah. I'm just going to say, I feel like we've seen companies like, Synthesis and Elo and Super Teacher that are kind of like, what if every kid had a reading tutor, a math tutor that was sitting next to them all day and could kind of understand how they learn best and cater to them. And then on maybe the other end of the spectrum, we've seen things like the Curio toys, which is like, what if maybe even more importantly than the tutor use cases for many kids, like what if they had just a friend, a mentor, a coach that was kind of with them every day and could both like track their progress and help them get them on the right track, or even just be like a completely sympathetic listening ear.
Mm-hmm. This is as a side note. Sorry, I know we're in lightning round. The companion stuff is so cool, and it still feels, of course, there's so many amazing companies like Character and many others, and a bunch around the top 100, top 50, but it just feels like we're in the first inning, maybe, or the warm-up or something of exploring this space, because there's so many contextual opportunities to do it. And look, I think one aspect of it may be completely sympathetic. Another aspect of companions might be not that sympathetic, one that really challenges you and pushes you and disagrees with you. So even something as simple as that, we always joke and call it East Coast mode, like a companion that's like a little more terse, doesn't exist. Why doesn't it? I don't know. And I think we're going to get to see those products in the next 2 years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. All right. In the interest of time, we'll skip over legal and medical, and maybe I can just ask for a word to Munjal from Hippocratic, because I would love to talk to him about what he's doing in the medical space. But how about just kind of, you mentioned companionship, maybe the last one in the lightning round is just kind of, it seems like the farthest out edge right now of this is like going beyond companionship and into relationship and even like not safe for work type of things. I don't know if that's stuff that you guys would touch, in investment terms, but I trust that you're at least scouting that territory somewhat. What do you see going on the far fringes of like romance with AIs today?
It's a good question. I think the thing that is surprising, everybody maybe, or at least I had an assumption that most of the companion use cases would be, like frisky young dudes. And it actually hasn't been that. A lot of it has been an audience that caters a lot more to women and probably feels more like interactive fiction than it does, what you might consider pornography. So, one, I think that there's a lot of mistaken assumptions that even I had about how the products would be used and who they're going to be used by. I also think that there's a lot of definitions of romance, and I think that people are sort of perhaps critiquing these products saying that they're a substitute for traditional romance, when in fact may make us so much more capable, because you've either got somebody, an AI that helps you train to be better at things like conversation and even flirting, or an AI that can just be a vent for a lot of the frustration and, emotional weight that people can sometimes bring to their in-person relationships. So those are some of the more surprising things. I don't know. What do you think, Olivia?
No, I agree. I think it's funny whenever we pull the top 50, top 100 list of AI apps, like, and send it around to our team, like every time without fail, people are like, oh my gosh, there's a ton of companion platforms on here. And a lot of them are maybe more NSFW oriented, but I think it's been exactly what Anish has said, in that it's actually much more of the AI boyfriend than the AI girlfriend use case, interestingly. and a lot more like interactive fan fiction, maybe, than anything else.
But that's a part of the human experience, right? Like, sexuality is a part of the human experience, and we can't pretend it doesn't exist. And when we do, you end up as Apple, who can't release a product for 5 years. So I think that we have to, we have to embrace that is going to be a part of these products, and just, find ways to get behind that. And of course, there's always going to be products at the fringes that we'll never invest in, and perhaps most people will never use. But those are almost the least interesting products to talk about, because it's always been that way.
Yeah, I've done 2 episodes actually with Eugenia from Replica, and the recent one was reviewing some research that folks at Stanford did that showed that not only did Replica reduce suicidal ideation in a substantial way for people that had that issue coming in, but also that for more often than not, it helped people get out into the world. Yeah. Questioned some of the data, some of it self-reported, whatever, but people indicated that they felt that using Replica was not like holding them back, but in fact like encouraging them to get out into the real world. So I thought it was quite interesting.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I think, as with all technology, but maybe even more so with AI, it feels to me like the shape and the specifics of the shape of exactly what we build is going to be like really important. I have no doubt that you could make a predatory romantic AI that is like, addictive and exploitative in all sorts of ways. But I think we do see at least some existence proofs that you can make like really positive, or at least like predominantly majority positive versions of these things. And that brings me to a question on just kind of rules of the road. I know that, it is early in this space. One rule that's been proposed is like AI must disclose its AI. That's a Yuval Noah Harari one that I like for its simplicity. I've also been thinking about the idea recently of a do not clone registry, which would be sort of the modern version of like do not call. Like you could go and say, here's my likeness and my voice, like don't clone me, other AI platforms. I'm wondering if you guys have any ideas for what either emerging best practices are or possible regulations that might keep all of this, on the good side as much as possible for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely early, but at least on my side, I've been surprised maybe by, it seems like more people these days are frustrated by, especially the large model companies taking the approach of we're not going to let you do something versus people being frustrated that like I'm being deep faked or I'm being cloned. Like that's not really happening to the average consumer right now. I think we've seen both the biggest startups and the biggest model companies be extremely careful about allowing you to even do anything related to a public figure, let alone personal pictures or other things like that. And so I think I personally am very intrigued by the idea of kind of the directory or the registry, especially because it opens up this opportunity for people of licensing or allowing their identity to be used for use cases that they are excited about. Like we're seeing platforms like 11 Labs, they have these kind of, iconic voice collections of celebrities or people who will allow their voices to be used. But it's also been a massive boon to this industry of voiceover artists that maybe historically couldn't get like a job in Hollywood. And now there's all of these voiceover jobs on 11 Labs. And we could see something similar in kind of the influencer or creator economy, where if you're an influencer with, 5,000 followers, you're going to have a hard time to get a big brand to respond to you. But if the AI avatar version of yourself is even better and more powerful and more extensible, then maybe you actually can get some of those big deals. So I'm really interested to see how people can kind of extend themselves using the AI tools versus I at least have seen less maybe to be concerned about the everyday person who isn't a public figure getting, deep faked or anything like that.
I totally agree. I think every time there's a new technology, the kind of, the talking heads try to get overly paternalistic. And I just don't think that's a generous enough view of the average consumer, how smart they are, how media literate they are. Of course, every technology has the potential for misuses, so I'm not being glib about that. But I do think, the paternalism is unwelcome and often unnecessary because people, have learned, for 30, 40 years that just because it's written a book, it's not true. And just because it's on the internet, it's not true. And just because it's on social media, it's not true. There's no reason that this technology will be any different. And, whatever we do here, I hope that we're sort of generous in our assumption that consumers are smart and savvy and will know how to use the products and technologies with like the appropriate level of caution.
Maybe just give me your sort of medium or long-term vision for where this voice-enabled computing is going to go. Is it going to be her? We're all walking around with the AI in our earpiece and we're untethered from our devices. Maybe we got glasses that pair with that. What's the sort of, tech optimist view of life in the, in this voice-enabled computing future?
I think that we will see voice unlocked as a kind of modality feature on every product and every interaction and in kind of every device. So, AirPods, glasses, your computer. As we've dove into voice, especially from a consumer use case, you find that there's a lot of situations where maybe you don't actually want to be having a two-way conversation or you can't be having a two-way conversation. You want it to be transcribing what you say or vice versa. You can't talk and you want it to be talking back to you. And so I think right now we're in the inning one of AI voice where we have kind of a set of really compelling and exciting products, but 5 years from now, they're going to look incredibly limited based on what we have then, where you can interact with voice in any way at any time for whatever is most useful and helpful to you.
Steve Jobs famously said that a computer is a bicycle for your mind. And that meant that a computer, extended us intellectually in ways that were unimaginable. And that's what technology has done for us for 40 years. I think we're now going to have the emotional version of that, sort of emotional bicycle, where it extends us emotionally through products like companionship, but many, many more. And I think voice is going to be the kind of primary catalyst and interface to that. So maybe a subject for our next conversation, but I think that's really the way it's going to impact us, and it's been a bit underestimated.
Cool. I love it. Olivia Moore and Anish Charya from A16Z. Thank you both for being part of the Cognitive Revolution.
Thank you.
Turpentine VC is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen and Econ 102. If you liked the episode, please leave a review in the Apple Store or rate us on Spotify. Hey everyone, Erik here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at eric@turpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.